So welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee being held on Tuesday the 26th of March 2024. For those present in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website, and the Council is recording this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. For participants in the room, please use the microphones to speak, pressing the button on the right of the unit. I've been asked to say, could you please speak directly towards the microphone, otherwise your contributions may not be picked up on the live stream. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Only committee members present in the meeting may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request that they use the raise hand feature within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they are called upon. The first item is apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillors Bartram and Hamlin. Substitutions, I'd like to say that Councillor Polly Andrews has substituted for Councillor Bartram. Thank you, Councillor Andrews, for that. Declarations of interest. Are there any interest to declare? I see none. The minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of January 2024 are included in the agenda for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the meetings as an accurate record? Those who attended last time, thank you very much. Questions from councillors? No questions have been received from councillors or from members of the public. So we move on then quickly to item 7, which is the External Auditor's Draft Annual Plan. I'd like to welcome Grace Hawkins as the new audit partner from Grant Thornton, who has assured me she's going to do her best to get our accounts approved and signed off in the same way as we have in the past. Grace, thank you. Rachel, is it you going to present? No, Grace? Okay, go ahead, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. So I'm Grace Hawkins. I've taken over from Peter Barber as the engagement lead for the 23-24 financial year. So we've got the audit plan on the agenda today, and this outlines our significant risk areas and audit approach.
Sorry, could you just push the microphone forward a wee bit more?
Sorry.
You're not just
Thank you. So this outlines our significant risk areas and audit approach for both the financial statements audit and the value for money audit. The significant risks for the audit are outlined on page 9 of the report, and these are consistent with what you would have seen in prior years. So our areas of focus will be on journals and material estimates, valuation of property, plant and equipment and investment properties, and the valuation of the pension fund liability. Our key risk for the value for money work is children's services, and that's due to the findings that were found in our prior year report, and we'll follow up the key recommendations that were raised from that. The team and the logistics are outlined on page 23 of the report. We do currently hope to commence the audit in late June, with the aim of issuing the opinion by the end of September, which is the statutory deadline for this year. However, I do want to bring to your attention that our audit manager, Roz, has just announced that she's pregnant, so we'll be going on maternity leave in around July, which is obviously great news for her, but it's causing us a bit of a headache in terms of resourcing the audit. I just wanted to ensure members that we are doing everything we can at the moment to resource that position to keep us on track for the end of September, and we're working closely with management to do that as well, and we'll keep you up to date if anything changes. I'll take the rest of the report as read, but happy to take any questions if there are any.
Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Grace. Thank you very much. So yes, there is a bit of concern that because there's a backlog of opinions for many other counties, but in Herefordshire, we pride ourselves on getting our reports in on time. Is there anything that Grant Thornton is doing to prioritise this replacement to make sure that we aren't, unintentionally penalised by not having, that you haven't got the people in place? So, what are the processes you're going through to resource someone in time?
Thank you for your question. Yes, so you cannot do an audit without an audit manager, really. It is a fundamental role, so that is what's causing us some concerns at the moment. But in order to mitigate the risk, we are trying to fill that post. So currently all audit managers do have a full portfolio, because obviously that's how we plan our work, and this is an unforeseen change that we couldn't plan for. So we are looking to other regions within the Grant Thornton network, within public sector, to see if there's any capacity for them to support us, or filling it from within our team and moving around some other audits to make sure that we can fulfill this one. So our aim is to keep this in phase 1, but I also wanted to bring it to your attention that there is a risk to that at the moment, but we are doing what we can.
Robert.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Grace. I understand we've heard that may not be the only risk you're facing. You've got to do some catch-up work as well on old audits for various counties, which will add to your workload. So you're missing an audit manager and you've got additional workload. And last year, without those two problems, you almost managed to meet this deadline but didn't quite make it. This is a bit worrying for us, I have to say.
Yes, you are right. There are a number of outstanding audits from prior years. Internally, we've been working to the end of March as a hard deadline for those old audits to close down, and any that won't be done then will be backstopped in September, which means that they won't then have an impact on the 23-24 financial year audits. So we are doing everything to make sure that backlog is cleared before the summer.
Aubrey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, in preparing the audit, how many hours and how many staff have you allocated to the current year's audit? Bearing in mind the 116.5% increase in the fee.
Thank you. Yes, so the fees are driven from PSAA as part of the new contract. So that's why you've seen an increase this year, is because it's the new contract year is 23-24. I'll have to come back to you on the specifics of hours, but we do have detailed budgets that underpin the audit. And we'll have myself, the audit manager, an audit in charge, and at least 2 associates working under the audit in charge as well to complete the audit. But I can come back to you on the exact number of hours if that's needed.
Frank.
Could you just tell me, I know I haven't read everything in detail, but could you tell me, is there the penalty for failing to achieve the audit deadlines? Is there a financial penalty? Is it just that we failed to do something?
There's no penalty, so the only thing that needs to happen is a notice needs to be published online to state the reason why the audit hasn't been done by the deadline, which is what would have been done in the prior year as well, but there's no financial penalty now.
So Grace, there are certain areas that you're concentrating on. I quite understand, because they are big ticket items. But things like the value of this building here, which is used as a sort of current asset, if you like, doesn't really matter how much it's worth or not. We use it all the time. It's not like an investment property, which I think sits into a totally different category. But longer term, do you see changes in the audit plans so that you don't have to spend as much time on running what I perceive as less important areas, although you should continue probably even with even more focus on investment properties, because that seems to be the issue the councils have.
Thank you. Yeah, like you said, investment properties do carry more risk just because of the nature of them. Unfortunately for 23-24, there are no changes to the standards or the code of practice. However, there is currently a consultation in place that is looking at the code and looking at kind of the audit market in general, and what the areas of focus and whether that is of value to public sector organisations. So hopefully the finance team have had links to complete that consultation and put their views across, and we are doing so as well as one of the leaders in the market. To put our view across on those areas, like you said, that potentially don't add value, but we are required to look at.
Aubrey.
Yes, Grace, further to the investment property valuations, I assume this includes the Maylord Orchard properties and the Skylon property investments. Would you see separate income and expenditure accounts for each of these separate investments. So I assume that some part of the valuation would relate to the income and profitability of these accounts.
Chair, with your permission, I
Yeah,
can take
right.
that one. So the valuation of our operational land and buildings is done on a rolling programme, and the valuation of investment properties is done annually. That's a requirement. And the information that's provided to the expert valuer, a firm called Wilkes, Head and Eve, will include the income and expenditure accounts for those sites.
Yes, would it be possible for us at some point to have copies of these accounts that back up the valuation of these investments?
We can look to provide some supporting information for you, certainly.
Yeah, Rachel, could you just remind us about the status of Maylords in terms of investment, or because it wasn't bought as an investment, was it? It was sort of almost a social asset. I don't know, Andrew's reaching forward for the microphone, so he's probably able to talk to this one.
Chair, I'm very happy to pick this up. As you say, Maylords was bought not as a true investment property to give us an investment return. It was bought as part of our economic development and social added value. On that basis, that was the reason we acquired it, and that's been the approach that's been adopted in terms of how the property is managed. But from a strict accountancy treatment, it's not an operational asset. We don't run council services through that building, such as we do here in Plough Lane. So from an accounting treatment, it is treated as an investment asset, and it's on that basis that it's in our accounts, and it's on that basis that the valuer will come and value it as a building or group of buildings.
Frank?
Thank you, Chair. Just because you've mentioned Maylord Orchards, can you tell me, when a business or a charity are looking to use properties in Maylord Orchards, they say that the rent is flexible, but the service charge is not. Is it why does that happen? And what does that service charge really? Why can't the council sort of be in charge of that service charge? Where does that come from?
Through you, Chair, in terms of the arrangements for organisations wanting to use space at Maylords, as you say, it's a commercial environment, it's a competitive environment, so there will be various conversation incentives around what rent to charge, whether it's rent-free period and those type of things, and that's handled by the team. In terms of service charge, we don't make a profit from the service charge. It is working out what it costs to maintain the buildings or the buildings, and there is a formula that divides that and it's allocated to the occupiers of the buildings. So we take the view that when somebody wants to rent a space in Maylords, we may have a commercial conversation about the rent levels, but we expect every tenant to pay for the service charge, because in simple facts, if one business there occupier is not paying it, that then has to be funded. Either it's, we can't really pass it on to the other tenants, so it then becomes a cost onto the council. And Chair, as you'll remember, when we acquired Maylords, we were very clear that there wouldn't be a cost to the taxpayer, so there wouldn't be an impact on council tax by operating that facility, and that's still the case. So the rents that we collect, and there are a broad spectrum of rents, covers the cost of running the building. The service charge covers the cost of the maintenance and those type of things.
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, so going to the recommendation, recommendation B talks about whether we determine any recommendations we wish to make to maximise the value of the external audit process. And I think we just like to emphasise, Grace, the value to us of getting the accounts completed in a timely manner, and thank you for the assurance you've given us. It's not 100% guarantee. Appreciate that, but we're sure you're doing everything you possibly can. If there is likely to be a change, if there's further things we can do to help that to transpire and for things to be done, then do. If you could give us early notice of that, it would be appreciated. Thank you. Yeah.
Could I please add a suggestion that we look again at not doing a formal audit of council properties that is not realisable. In other words, assets that we own that we could never sell. They have some risk, of course, because we have to maintain or look after them, but we can't sell them, so their actual value from year to year is completely irrelevant. And I wonder why we should be looking at that in detail every time.
Yeah, we can certainly write that into the recommendations, but I'm not sure it's possible because there's a statutory requirement, isn't there, from an audit perspective. Rachel?
Yeah, so the code of practice and the auditing standards highlight the areas of testing that the auditors need to complete before they can issue an audit opinion. As Grace mentioned, there's consultation underway to look at that code of practice and simplification of the financial statements, which would then reduce the burden of audit work required, but that's some way off. So for this year, there will be a requirement and likely for next year as well, in terms of those valuation of buildings.
Okay, so please can we, I understand this year's fixed, but please can we press to get a more rational code of practice, because councils all over the country are spending money on things that it's not really giving them any value back.
I'm sure you'll be doing that, Rachel. So perhaps with the recommendations that, yes, we seek a timely sign off the accounts, but also encourage officers to press the necessary authorities to have a proportionate approach to the value of assets which are in use by the council. Okay, is that fair enough, Robert? You'll pick that up in the minutes. Thank you. And the first recommendation is proposed external audit plan is approved, subject to any recommendations. I don't think we have any recommendations, so recommendation A and B as amended. All those in favour? Show of hands. Thank you very much. Thank you, Grace. The next item, Grace, if you need to go, I think you're more than welcome to stay. Make a few phone calls around the country to get. So item 8, Matthew. This is a new one being passed to you, and thank you for coming to this group to explain a little bit about risk. And perhaps I'll just leave it to you to introduce. I think it's an opportunity just for floating a few ideas around, and then maybe at a later stage you come with something more detail. Although I actually personally think it's about the right sort of length. We don't want more complex papers. So over to you, Matthew. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just in front of you is the paper for risk management, and it serves several purposes. We felt firstly just to give a bit of an understanding in terms of how the council currently manage risk across the council, so a bit of a shared understanding. I think often there's perhaps not enough acknowledgement or recognition of the level of work that's going on to manage risk across the local authority. So there's quite a comprehensive background, and that's drawn on several different documents in terms of the risk management policy, which the council published several years ago, back in 2020, and also a risk management strategy, an internal document which the council uses to manage risk. So that's very much the first part. And then the second part really is just talking about, I know the committee's previously heard about some of the shortfalls in the council's approach to risk management and progress against some of those actions that have previously been identified. So there's a short summary of terms of work undertaken against that. I think there's probably some recognition that maybe progress hasn't been made as quick as what we would have wanted, partly due to risk management being overseen by several different corporate officers. And then thirdly, at the end of the document, there's just a summary of the corporate risk register as they stand at the end of Q3. So I won't really go into any more detail. I think it's quite self-explanatory across the report. I'm joined by Lee Washbrook, who's online, who's our interim head of performance, who can also helpfully answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, so any questions? Mark, I don't know whether you want to start off. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Matt. It is a very complex collection documents, and I'm trying to get accustomed to it. I mean, each time you get a new set of members having to realign themselves to this corporate risk register. Would you be kind enough to take me through an example of how a corporate risk is progressed and gets onto, like, Appendix 2, for example? One of the ones that I'm sort of a bit more familiar with would be CRR 85, so Waste Management Services Contract. That's on page 24 of our supplement. It's the top one there. And that's in Mark Averill's department. So this is the end of Q3, so that would be December, yeah? End of December. And things have moved on since. So things have happened now. So what will you do for the end of Q4, so which is end of March, end of this week, pretty much? How do you go about reassessing that risk? Because we know things have happened. We know that it's moved on and that contract has moved on. Could you just walk me through what do you do next with this particular, in the risk register? What do you do with Mark Averill or whoever it is to then decide, right, what is the mitigation, what's the likelihood, what's the risk? How do you reassess it? Could you just walk me through it?
Okay, I'll probably have to defer you to Lee for that one. I mean, I think that in general, there's different levels of risks that are managed at different levels. So I think we have quite a comprehensive project management office here in the council. So they're a group of officers that oversee projects and programs in terms of, are they on track, are they achieving their objectives, and risk is very much part of that. And it's normally two-way conversations between those project groups that oversee those projects that meet on a regular basis, and they revisit risk registers and when risks turn to issues. And then there's other risk levels across the council that may not be overseen by PMO that have to then get escalated via other mechanisms, whether it's through service risk registers. But I think, Lee, do you want to come in terms of because your kind of team see the exact processes? Yeah. You might be able to explain it a bit better than I just did.
Yeah, of course. The process for managing these risks are ongoing. They are not a finite, we do it on certain points of the day. What generally happens, we have directorate risks and we are liaising with the service directors on a regular basis. So Mark Averill in particular, we have met with him probably 2 to 3 times each month. If there are any updates to his risk, he will meet with my team lead. They will update the central risk register for that directorate when they receive any further information, and they will verify with Mark that it's accurate, it's true, and it's today. The unfortunate thing is that the Q3 we are late on publishing this one. We would normally do it quicker, so it wouldn't be so far removed from December. So we would be looking to do this on an earlier juncture. But actually, the directorate risks are updated on a monthly basis at the most, probably less than that, dependent if there's a lot of movement within the programme or the project or the operation itself. So it will be updated regularly so we know that it's moving forward. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate on this one, we are a little bit further removed from Q3.
Okay, thank you. So you'd have a schedule where you go through all the risks on the risk register based on their importance, the red, yellow, green, the ragging, and you try
which is scored, yeah.
Yeah, so you'd focus on those and make sure, and pretty much every month then you say you're going through the whole sequence with every directorate who has those high level risks.
We are going through all the operational risks with the directorate each month. Right. The PMO, which manages, the capital programs and major projects, they will be updating on a monthly basis as well. So directorate-wise, we do it on a more regular basis, but on the corporate risk register, we will do it on a quarterly basis.
Okay, and does that mean that it's only instigated when you arrange the meeting, or is there the option that the directorate could inform you, could proactively approach you and say they need to change something? Good.
It's both ways, because sometimes a process or a program can move quicker than just monthly, so it will be updated on a live basis if needed.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Robert.
Yes, thank you very much for the this report. One of the things that's quite confusing, altogether, I see there are 4 different, if you like, reports or policies on this subject. And in those different reports, I mean, we've got the risk strategy, we've got the council's approach to risk management, we've got this report, managing risk across the council. And within those various documents, there are all the right words, but it is not succinct enough, it is not clear enough, it needs to be regularised into the new policy without any other confusing documents. And the risk register itself is also a very lengthy, and I think for the people in the different areas, they're probably clear, but for outsiders trying to look at it and get an overall picture, it's also quite complex. So that's my first concern. And secondly, the key thing, and I think everybody would agree on this, is does our approach to risk fall in the right balance? I mean, are we going too averse or are we not averse enough? And that, of course, is a very subjective thing. It requires judgment and skill from the officers dealing with different areas. But there are things which fall outside of the grey area of judgment in the middle. There are things that are clearly no, and there are things that should clearly be yes. But that's not always actually happening. So what I'd like to see in our policy is there's a bit better guidance as to taking the right balance on risk. Because I could point to 1 or 2 small areas, to be fair, within this council where we are so risk averse we are doing nothing and we're not doing our job. And that has obviously gone too far one way. And of course, it would probably be even worse going the other way and getting ourselves in financial trouble, for example, by taking a risk we should never have taken. So we've got to find a way that the areas that are in the black and the white and the size of the black and white, each side of the middle, is of the right size. And I think that needs to be referred to, that we need to make more effort to see that there is guidance as to that judgment that has to be made, rather than a lot of words in here. And as I say, in amongst them, they're all the right words. But I've seen a lot of papers like that in this council so far, and I prefer to see it a bit more succinct. Thanks.
Matt, can you respond to that?
I don't disagree with you. You know, I think from picking up risk, 3 months ago, I think we do need to streamline the processes and get clarity in terms of how we manage risk more effectively in the local authority. And that's not just within a select few people. I think that's, you know, we want this council to everyone to understand risk, and it runs through all that we do. So I think, you know, those papers are definitely drawn from the key policy documentation, but I think some of the feedback I've had, particularly from my fellow directors, is that actually it's very complicated and we can streamline it, and we need to understand our appetite for risk. And some of the work the corporate leadership team is developing a new target operating model, so a future council operating model, and how does risk really kind of embed within that. I think that still needs a lot of work. So my recommendation is we need to review the risk management policy. We need to update it. You know, that was back in 2020. That was in 24. And then just actually take on some of the board's your comments, which I've heard from others, about how we can streamline it. Make it really clear, you know, like I say, how we manage risk, how do officers manage risk, how they escalate it, how they de-escalate it. It is very subjective as well, but we need to kind of develop and give that framework that officers work within. I'll be honest, risk doesn't excite a lot of people, so it's kind of how do we actually make risk kind of understandable so everyone can work with it.
Yeah, it is, Mr. Chairman, it is a specialised area of management. Risk management requires skills. There are people who do PhDs in risk management, so it needs that input because there are grey areas, it is subjective, and ordinary people like us do our best. But we just make sure that the best practice in risk management is incorporated in that policy, and that will possibly require expert intervention.
Yeah, completely agree. The other thing I think is really important is how we get consensus across some of these risks as well. So through project management, we try and get project managements to assess risk collectively. So it's not just one perspective, is it red, or you know, what is that score? So I think we've got to get that ownership at all the different levels as well, you know, directorates and corporates. So yeah, I completely agree.
Polly.
I'm sorry if this seems simplistic or because I'm just standing in on this committee, but I looked at it, we seem to have an extraordinarily complicated system with 3 different layers of risk management, each presumably needing staff to evaluate them. And I just wonder if the whole system could be simplified and speeded up a little.
Matt, do you want to respond to that?
Well, as I said, I think to my previous answer, I think it probably is overcomplicated. We could certainly revisit those levels. I guess what we need to do is kind of have a level of proportionality to those risks, don't we? And understand, what risks can be managed at the lowest possible level and what risks need to be escalated. So there does need to be a level of kind of, tiers, if you like. And we can certainly revisit, though, that as part of the review of the risk management policy.
Yeah, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I know we're not supposed to discuss individual risks on this, but what I was interested in, what the process would be when a new risk is identified potentially externally by other counties or by other industry. For example, the risk of the improper use of AI in day-to-day work, or another threat that is relatively new to councils across the UK. Where do you get flagged up on those from like a national risk register that they tell you should be thinking about this, please incorporate it next year or in your risk register, or do you rely on the directors to inform you of those? I mean, how do you work on new, I suppose, risks which are developing in our society and not the old traditional risks,
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd hope it's 2 ways. So directors would notify us of risks. I mean, I sit on the local resilience forum, so that's the chief officers across West Mercia, for example, as part of emergency planning. So we often discuss the national risk register, whether that's terrorism, whether that's flooding. AI hasn't quite got on that risk register yet, as far as I'm aware, but it could be. I think that's another area of opportunity for us. I'm not sure we've got that alignment with the national risk register into our risk register, and I think that's been identified previously, where there are big kind of static national risks that might not really move much over the course of a year to 2 years. But we need visibility of them, and we need to make sure we mitigate those risks. So a lot of that information does come through the local resilience forum. But other risks outside in terms of the private industry, I'm not sure. That's probably the only form or network I can imagine risk coming downwards, if I'm honest, through there. Lee, I don't know if you're aware of any other kind of avenues or forums for risk coming in other forums.
No, most of our new risks that if they have been identified externally, normally come through the directorates themselves, and then they will work with us to build them and put them onto their risk registers, and we will score them accordingly, and that will determine at what level they sit within the policy. So no, it would normally come through the directorate route.
I mean, just to give you an example, just from my specialism in public health, if there's a pandemic, for example, I'll get intelligence from the UK HSA that would say, pandemic's actually probably one of the highest risks actually on our corporate risk register. It should be on there. But I'll get specialist advice nationally fed down, and then we would add that onto the risk register if needed, if that makes sense.
I think I was thinking of an example a little bit, Mark. So unaccompanied asylum seekers is obviously a very important issue, particularly in Kent. But I would see that as an operational risk rather than strategic. Would that be a fair assessment? Whereas a strategic one might be something about housing, and the more and more older people are coming to Hereford or close to retirement, and they're going to live here for another 20 years, and their own personal support network is down in the southeast. That's a kind of risk which is more perhaps strategic. I don't know. Again, I'm probably going too much into the detail.
Yeah, I think that's where we just need framework to kind of guide our thinking. It can slip into both, can it, depending on perspectives, and I think that's where we need to get a consensus when we discuss these risks. I think you're probably right. It probably will go into operational, and it's probably an immediate issue that's come to light.
Yeah. Robert.
Yeah, to follow on from what Mark said, with new risks being identified, do you think we're moving fast enough when something new comes up? Because there's sometimes an opportunity to nip something in the bud if you move quickly enough. Are we identifying the risk and then starting action on it quickly enough, in your opinion?
Lee, probably one for you, I think. I mean, from my point of view, I think if as soon as we become aware of a risk, it goes onto the risk register, and we then put in the actions that we need to mitigate it. It's down to those individual directors, I guess, to do that.
Well, before Lee answers, let me give another example. Mark recently, and there's also the government itself, including the Prime Minister, have recently made public the concern about Chinese government hacking groups that have been interfering in all sorts of levels of our society. Those are two which are serious and urgent. Are they on our risk register yet?
Lee, I'll go to you on that one.
Well, I'm not aware of the Chinese threat on our risk register at the moment, to be fair. But what I would say is that the risks, those sort of risks, on some of those risks will may be sitting on directorate risk registers at the moment. They may have been seen quickly and put on them. They may not score to get onto the corporate risk register. I got to be honest, I haven't seen the risk that China poses at the moment, but I'm not sure we've got a real handle on that one nationally yet. But as soon as they are identified by the services operationally, they are entered onto the directorate risk register. There is no hold up, and this is what I was saying earlier. We don't wait until a certain date in the month to add anything to the risk register. It will be added as soon as it's identified and we are aware, and then we will work with the service directors primarily to get them entered onto the risk registered and correctly narrated on this, so we have the detail and the actual risk and the score that risk poses. So we are quick to identify and put on there, but I can't say that we pick up every risk immediately. But I don't know what system would be in place that could pick them up any quicker than we do now through the operations and the directorate.
I mean, just coming back to me, in direct response to your question, I'm not sure we are responsive enough, and I think that information would come primarily down from the National Risk Register. And in that specific example, it would be the likelihood that it would move up quickly. So we'd probably, hopefully already have that on our risk register. But actually, if the government's only say from the National Risk Register that likelihood has increased, then obviously that needs to be brought to our attention and we need to respond quickly. I think there's still a gap between the National Risk Register and our local risk register, and that's something I think we need to address, which would hopefully plug that gap.
So Matt, you're reviewing the policy, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So the policy was last written in 2020, so that needs a bit of an overhaul, and I think there's some of the opportunities here in terms of some of the feedback we've got today, and I think it would be good to get some wider consultation in terms of developing that and making sure, I mean, it's not a complete overhaul, but I think there's some good feedback from this committee and other corporate directors. We've already had some feedback about how we might want to simplify it and make it easier for officers to understand.
So what sort of timescale are you working?
I haven't got a specific timescale, but I was hoping probably to see that within the next 3 months or so.
Okay, shall we give you 6 months to
Yep.
do that? And I don't know, the policy, I guess, goes through the normal internal stuff with the senior leadership team, and it goes through that. It doesn't come first to this committee. That will be towards the end, I would imagine.
Yeah, we can do that. I think we need to schedule out the timescales, exactly how the process we're going to take, how we're going to engage with staff and make sure it's updated. So that would be reasonable, I think.
Yeah. I think risk generally is not desperately attractive, but within any business, if you evaluate the risks, it enables you to correct them and do things slightly differently, and so it reduces the risk as a result of that. So if it's embedded throughout the whole organisation, then that's a useful way. So in about 6 months we'll have perhaps another draft, and I guess we'll be looking again at the corporate risk register, those top 16 and see what movements there are to satisfy ourselves that, that they aren't just sitting there on the shelf with nothing happening. Mark, will that satisfy you, do you think?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and that the new policy, I mean, that there are actions resulting from it. I mean, that's the other thing about the policy, is to make sure that when a risk is identified, it is acted on, and those mitigations are actually functioning, they're working. Because that's the back end, that's the second part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Prove that they are actually having an impact, that, as you were saying, we're not being strangled by them, but they are protecting, if you like, they're protecting the council and they're protecting the county.
And just
Robert, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, may I suggest that the council plan, that's got an excellent graphic, and it shows each of the subsidiary plans, who's responsible for it, what the plan is. There's some great links in there. First of all, we could add one, whoever's responsible for managing risk within the council and what the plans are in place for it. That could go into that, couldn't it?
Yes, so do you want to make that a sort of recommendation from this committee to pass back to the leader of the council in writing that plan to talk about an element of risk?
Yes, it's an important area, and in the meeting we had on the council plan, that didn't come up. But I think had it done so, people would have said, yeah, that's important. We should have something in there about that.
Okay, certainly something for him to the leader to consider. Thank you. Rupert, yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah,
I was just
please
going to come in and offer the assistance of SWAP. Obviously, we have the benefit of working across sort of 25 to 40 different local authorities, so we might be able to help plug that gap, like Matt says, between the National Risk Register, but what typically a unitary authority might have on their corporate risk register. Obviously, we hold all those risks, so quite happy to obviously share that. And we also regularly review risk management as an audit area. So we've seen multiple risk management policies, frameworks, appetites. So just to offer any assistance that we can in providing information in that review.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there really isn't much of a recommendation, although we have determined some recommendations just now, things, further actions, and those are approved. Polly, did you want to add something?
Well, just to make sure that we do look at trying to simplify the system.
Yeah.
Make it less expedient.
Yes, I think that's something you've taken on board, Matt, isn't it? And, yeah. So we move on then, I think, to the next item, number 9. So statutory accounts, 23-24 progress, accounting policies and estimates. I think this is you, Rachel, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. This report provides an update on our progress towards the completion of the 23-24 financial statements, so those for the year ending 31st of March 2024. There are a few days remaining over the financial year. We've got a very detailed close-down timetable in place that enables us to finalise outturn. That's the position for the council for the year, and to close the financial ledger and prepare the statutory accounts. We're on target to produce those draft statements by the statutory deadline of the 31st of May, and we'll bring those to this committee at its meeting in June for approval, along with the annual governance statement. The accounting policies which accompany this report are the rules and principles which we apply in the preparation of the financial statements, and there are no changes to those in this financial year. Those are included in the statutory accounts against each relevant note. Separately, in this report, we've also included an appendix on areas where we apply accounting estimates and judgments, and you'll note that these are closely aligned to the significant audit risks that you've seen in the external auditor's draft audit plan for this year. That identifies the source data that we use to make those estimates and judgments, and the external advice that we receive, particularly in respect of the valuations. We make use of some expert valuers, and in terms of the pension fund liability, we rely on the work of the actuary. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. So this is continuing the same as before. You haven't identified any areas of improvement or weakness. just asking us to approve what's been happening in the past. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions? Or Mark? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Rachel. On land and buildings valuations, I mean, I'm not an accountant, and Frank, you might be able to help me out here, but you run business. But if you could once again help me through a process, the old library, I mean the old, the new library, it's going to be the new library.
The Shire Hall.
The Shire Hall, thank you, Chair. So the Shire Hall, I believe, has been, you know, it may be deprecated, or it was unused for many, many years. Okay, so it's fallen into disrepair and all that, and it's, what was it, an asset or a liability? I'm not sure. It's probably a liability back then, but now it's going to be, there's going to be some investment in it. So it's going to switch in its state, okay? And it's going to be brought back onto the books. So what's the accounting policy, and when do you reverse, I think it's called the reversal of an impairment loss, which it might be. Is that right? So it's a reverse, if that's a reversal of it, because it was severely impaired and there's going to be money put into it. So what happens, could you just explain to me what happens with the old Shire Hall in this year's financial report? Is it impacting there, or is it going to be on next year's?
Through you, Chair. So the Shire Hall building, from a classification perspective, so within the property, plant and equipment note within the accounts, we have different classifications of our land and building assets. So we have operational assets, investment assets, and we have a category called assets under construction. So those are assets where work is being carried out. So Shire Hall will be classified in that category this year. Each year we provide detailed information to the valuers, and they use all of that source data to inform their valuation, carrying out impairment reviews as part of their work, and that takes place annually.
Thank you, Rachel. So does that mean that when the project, either whilst the project is happening, it stays in the construction area, and at some point a decision will be made that that's finished, and it will be then go onto the books as an asset? Is that right?
Yeah, so the valuation in the accounts is at the balance sheet date, so it's always at the 31st of March 2024 that we undertake that revaluation of assets. So at this point next year, when we come to prepare the 24-25 accounts, we'll again stand on that balance sheet date and consider which category of land and building assets that particular item needs to fall into, and we'll update accordingly. In terms of the transfer between the categories, that very much depends on completion certificates, etc., that we'll review to determine whether it can legitimately move between one category to another. An external audit certainly review any reclassifications as part of their audit testing.
Any other questions? Yes, Polly.
The Shire Hall has been mentioned. I'll leap in and say, do you categorise the Town Hall in the same way?
Yeah, the Town Hall is an operational asset, so that will be included in that category in the land and buildings note. But at each year we review for eligibility within each category, and part of the audit testing is not just on the valuation of the asset and the movement in that value in the year, but it's very much on the classification in our accounts and the presentation of that.
Frank, follow questions this afternoon.
It's just learning how things work, really. As Mark says, when you run a business, some of the things are interesting as to how you do things differently within the council or the same. So, like me, your year end's coming to an end very quickly, and we've got about 7 or 8 months in which we've got to get all our stuff to HMRC. Is that the same process for you? Is there a penalty involved if you don't manage to do it? And the other interesting thing is, do you have to pay corporation tax on any profits you make?
Through you, Chair. So public sector authorities are not tax-paying bodies. So unlike a set of limited company accounts in the private sector, you have your 9 months and 1 day to submit accounts to Companies House and 9 months to submit to Revenue and Customs with your corporation tax return. The requirements are not the same in the public sector. We have a statutory deadline to publish the draft accounts by the 31st of May, following each financial year end. And in order to produce those draft statements, we have to finalise and agree that outturn position, and that will be reported to Cabinet as a Q4 report. The other statutory requirement then is an external audit, and as we've heard earlier, the statutory deadline for this year will be the 30th of September to receive that audit opinion and supply responses and supporting working papers to enable the audit testing process to take place.
Thank you, Rachel.
Aubrey.
Thank you, Chair. In progress against the prior year audit recommendations, there's a number of old checks that hadn't been cleared that came up, and in the document you've forwarded, you say that currently 12 outstanding that we plan to deal with before the year end. Are these now being looked into and cleared?
Through you, Chair. So that's one of the external audit recommendations from the prior year. It would have been included in the annual audit report that you received in October, I think, and as part of our year-end procedures and the bank reconciliation at the 31st of March 2024, we will be reviewing all outstanding items and hope to clear those.
Thank you.
So I think we'll go to this recommendation, which is that the arrangements for the preparation of the 23-24 statutory accounts, including management arrangements to identify and evaluate accounting estimates, are reviewed and confirmed as satisfactory, and the accounting policies which inform the preparation of the accounts are approved. Is that recommendation accepted? Aye. Thank you very much. Item 10, internal audit planning paper. This is to adopt a slightly different approach, which hopefully will increase our understanding of this particular subject. Rachel, I don't know if it's you or Rupert on this. Rupert, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so first of two swap papers this afternoon, and this is looking ahead to next year, and like you say, Chair, our sort of internal audit planning approach. So slightly different approach proposed this year, hopefully explained in the paper in line with sort of shifts in our industry, as well as what we're seeing working well across other local authorities that swap audits, a move towards a sort of more rolling and continuous planning approach, rather than that sort of one-time risk assessment and presentation of an annual plan, which historically we've done around this sort of time and would have brought to this committee. Like I say, hopefully sort of explain some of the rationale behind that change, but essentially, and actually not dissimilar to the risk management discussion we've just had, actually sort of multiple, sort of regularly touching base with sort of multiple leadership teams, with directors, hearing their views on risk, on areas of governance, control, risk that they would benefit from internal audit work on, and obviously our dialogue back to them in terms of suggestions and what we're seeing in the wider sort of audit profession. So really keen to move to that more sort of regular, continuous approach. It will be supplemented by access to a sort of live plan through Audit Board. So that's our audit management system. And actually we've put sort of screenshots of that in our next swap paper, so that when we update our plans, that's updated back to management and members in a sort of live fashion, rather than having to sort of once a quarter come back and try and explain all the changes. So hopefully a far more sort of agile and responsive methodology. We've seen it work really well at other authorities, and again, like I say, it ensures that internal audit can remain extremely responsive and agile in its work, and hopefully pick up again some of the areas we've discussed today around AI or you know, Chinese cybersecurity or anything what sort of current and of the now. We can have those discussions quicker, adapt our plans quicker, and hopefully audit the right things at the right time. The only other thing to flag in this report, Chair, is on the final page of the paper. Typically, we'd bring our internal audit charter to this meeting of the committee in March. As a profession, we're going through a sort of fairly big overhaul of our internal audit standards, and I've just provided a brief update on that paper on that page. What we will do is they've just been released, so there's still sort of documents that haven't yet been sort of put out there in terms of sort of standard or best practice documents. So we're just waiting for that to be released. We're expecting that in the next couple of weeks. So we'll bring that back to a later committee. But it's just to say that we continue to operate under our existing charter that was approved last year. But that's the reason for the slight delay in bringing that. That's all I was going to say on that one, Chair, but happy to take any questions or expand further. Thank you.
And you're working closely with the rest of the council team to focus on particular areas for audit. I think previous meetings I've had with you were talking about going back to basics. The financial issues are such that your activities perhaps needs to be focused on just a little bit of survival at the moment. Is that a fair comment?
I think, to be fair, what we try and do with all our work is align it to the kind of strategic risks facing not only Herefordshire, but like I've said, sort of other perhaps authorities in similar positions, and that's where hopefully we can bring that sort of gap analysis, that even if it's not on Herefordshire's corporate risk register, hopefully we can bring our sort of knowledge and say, well, actually other authorities, cybersecurity or data protection, for example, is the number one issue. It's not on your risk register, but presumably Herefordshire is no different or not exempt from the same sort of challenges. So we try and sort of align our work to one sort of strategic risks at Herefordshire, but if not, sort of other risks that would typically be faced by sort of local authorities in the same sector or same geographical area.
Thank you. Robert.
Yeah, do you think that this rolling audit plan approach will give an opportunity to identify problems sooner than has been currently the case?
I think definitely so, and I think that's hopefully one of the key benefits, that there'll be far more regular conversations with both management and hopefully members for your input as well. And I think, like we discussed with the risk management discussions, the more regularly you have those conversations, the more people can react and sort of say, saw that in the news yesterday, have we got that covered here? Or received a report on that last week, have we got that covered here? If you're only having those conversations, far less frequently, once every 6 months, once every year even, you're not able to respond as quickly, and therefore you end up following sort of set plan, which was set with good intentions, but as we all know these days, time moves very quickly, and what we predict will happen in a year's time often isn't the case, or our expectations are exceeded or disappointed, however you want to look at it, I guess.
Thank you. Mark, did you have a question? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Right, thank you, Rupert. The audit board, that's your software that you're going to be using. How dependent are you on that operating in order to be responsive and achieve the speed that is required to do this rolling audit? I mean, is that vital to the success of this?
It is in the sense that that's where we document our work, but like any computer system, there's really good security assurances around that in terms of downtime. I think it's something ridiculous like 99.9% guaranteed or something. Obviously, no system can be absolute. We've used it for coming up to 2 years now, and again, I think it reflects that kind of downtime percentage. So we are reliant on it, but equally we'd be able to access it offline in emergency situations. So it certainly wouldn't fall down, and again, it would be more around the regular conversations and hopefully the kind of absolute transparency in terms of what we're auditing and what we're adding to the plan.
If I may just follow up there. So you've had it for 2 years. That's great. So it's settled in now. And are you planning, you said, to make it more available to maybe the council? Are you going to be training council members or council officers in its use?
Yes, absolutely. So we've started rolling it out to certain management. So I know Andrew and Rachel have access. What we're really keen to do is roll it out to members as well. And again, like you say, there'll need to be some training with that. Hopefully it's a fairly intuitive system, but like anything, there'll be some training. So I am hoping in conjunction with Jen that hopefully we can do a sort of member training session where perhaps we pick up internal audit as a thematic topic, and happy to cover it off there. where we cover all things internal audit, and at the same time we can go through audit board. But happy to do that as soon as time permits.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I would definitely be interested in being involved in that. What's your, you say, in the future, what's your rough time scale for being able to make that available, that training?
The training can be done really quickly, so next 2-3 weeks. I guess it's whether we want to do it all as a collective committee, in which case it will be, like I say, when diaries permit, or whether individually we can roll it out. And again, I'm really keen to be absolutely transparent in this in terms of access. So happy to do it as a collective committee if we have a sort of pre-meet at the June committee, or alternatively can do it much quicker than that if there's the appetite there.
That's great. So if that can be done online, even that'll be great. Thank you,
Mark. I think Rachel may want to just interject there.
Yeah, happy to work with Jen and arrange that training session. We can coordinate that alongside one of the meetings, I think. Yep.
Thank you. That would be very exciting. It'd be great to see that. I did have a question, if I may, about.
Mark. Yep.
Thank you. The coverage of corporate risks. So there's 16 corporate risks, I believe, in the agenda supplement, and those guide your auditing. So you use those as a way to identify which areas should have the most of your time, a proportion of your time for auditing. Last year, for example, we haven't finished this year, but are you on target to have covered 100% of all those corporate risks? And then how do you identify how much of each you've covered? So, have you just touched lightly on 3 of them and gone in deep in 4 of them, or how do you work that out?
Yes, it's a really good question. I think I'll probably touch on it in our next paper, but I'm happy to pick it up now because I think it is a really good question. So yes, you're right that we use it as, well, it's one of the factors that we use when setting our internal audit work. So it's not the only one. Obviously, like I say, we're really keen that our work aligns with the risks that the council faces. So it's a good starting point, but we also consider performance data, we consider sector-wide risks, we consider industry sort of guidance. But the corporate risk register is always a really great starting point. Like I say, in our next paper, what we do try and provide then is a coverage map. So listing all those risks, how has our work sort of covered those risks, to what extent? And I'm just flicking through to the exact terminology so I don't get this wrong. But we provide that on I think it's a 4-scale basis. 5 scale. So it's a good coverage, adequate coverage, some coverage, work in progress, so there will be some coverage, but we're sort of work in progress, or none. Currently, and that's included on page 96 of the agenda pack, the picture's not where we want it to be. Of those corporate risks, there's quite a few areas where there is no coverage. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, internal audit's just one assurance provider. There may be internal assurance mechanisms within the council where directors themselves know that they've had a consultant in and have reviewed that, or the waste collection, for example, you mentioned, that's moved on and it's no longer a corporate risk, for example. But again, what we try and do is map each of our audits and say, does it relate to one of the council's corporate risks? And if so, then it falls onto that kind of 5-scale category of, do we have good coverage of that risk? But you're absolutely right to then ask the question that as members, hopefully the question posed is, well, if internal audit haven't provided any assurance over this risk, who has? Is there another mechanism where I can seek that assurance?
Thank you.
Good. So thank you very much. Useful question, Mark. Just linking everything together with the corporate risk to see how they're covered. I think some are probably well covered by children's services. They're pouring all over that anyway, so that was an area where perhaps the internal audit doesn't need at the moment to pay so much attention. But there may be things which are below the radar which they might need to look at. So this item, the recommendation is the committee approve the rolling audit plan, and I think we do. Just a nod or show of hands, we approve that method. Thank you. Moving on then, another one for you, Rupert. So this is the internal audit update, really putting some meat on the bones for us. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And Amy was hoping to be here today to present. Unfortunately, she's picked up a sickness bug, so probably just as well she's not here with us, but she sends her apologies. So this is one of our regular internal audit progress reports. It summarises the internal audit work for the final quarter of the 2023-24 financial year, and it's dated as at the 8th of March. Since our last update to committee, which I believe was back in the end of January, there have been no high organisational risks identified in our work to bring to your attention, so that's positive news. There has been one limited assurance audit. This related to our work carrying out a supporting families grant certification. We do this work on a sort of quarterly basis, but no major concerns, although obviously received a limited assurance in that area as a sort of organisational wide risk assessment. We assess that as low. Since our last update, we've continued to make good progress with the audit plan. We've completed a further 4 audits and progressed another 4 audits to draft report stage. Like we've discussed with our rolling plan, we've included kind of screenshots, so that's exactly as you'll see it on the live system. But we've obviously for now included screenshots within the report pack, so that will track and give sort of assurance to members in terms of all the work that we've completed, the respective assurance opinion, the number of actions, for example. Based on the work we've completed to date in the financial year, we have provided that sort of rolling opinion of reasonable assurance, which again is a good news story. And 90% of the opinion-related work found that the control environment to either be substantial or reasonable assurance. In terms of the sort of coverage graphics, which again we've sort of touched on in the previous planning item, like we've discussed, we're really keen, obviously, to align our work to corporate risks. It's great to hear the planned updates to the corporate risk register, and obviously we'll sort of update our system accordingly based on that sort of revised and refreshed risk register. And as the members already asked, we're really keen to map our work against that and identify where we have provided coverage against risks, but equally importantly where we haven't, so that management and members can satisfy themselves that there's other sort of assurance mechanisms in place, or that they're comfortable that that's been adequately controlled. I think, to be fair, Chair, I'll leave it there and take any questions. Thank you very much.
So Rupert, on page number 3, there's quite a lot of red. It's always a bit of a concern. Could you just run us through that page? Thank you.
Yes, definitely, Chair, and this picks up on what we were discussing in terms of that coverage of our audit work. So that's basically saying the risk register as it was. That's then mapping our work against that risk register. Where have we provided assurance? Again, I think compared to other perhaps corporate risk registers, I'd say some of the risks in here are maybe more specific and perhaps not sort of. What we typically see is data protection or cybersecurity, or even AI creeping on, or pandemic, as Matt mentioned. Again, I think that probably leads to some of the reds, that some of these are, HCR 67 ash dieback, for example, quite a specific risk, and obviously on the register, probably due to the scoring on the matrix, that it's made it up to that level. So no, we haven't provided any work in that area. But like I say, because they are quite specific, some of those I'm not so concerned about. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd like a sort of a broader spread of coverage. But I think when the risk register has been refreshed, I think that's a great opportunity for us to then start to align our work increasingly, or at least our planning discussions, with that risk register.
So I guess in summary, you're not too concerned about this red, as it were. That, we should have some comfort that some areas are being dealt with and others are being covered in other ways, but generally we needn't be too concerned about this.
I think some of them are specific, and therefore I'm not concerned. In an ideal world, I'd like there to be less red on that, and our plan over the course of the year to, again, if they are genuinely the top corporate risks of the authority, then I'd like our work to have a kind of broader coverage of those risks. But like I say, with the refresh of the corporate risk register, I think that's a good time to have those discussions. And like Matt says, that kind of moderation, that they are genuinely the top risks facing Herefordshire at this time.
Any other questions? Anybody? No? Well, Rupert, thank you very much for that. Let's see, what's the recommendation? I guess that we note your report. We review the areas of activity and concern and satisfied necessary improvements are outlined and delivered. And we note the assurances provided. That's all. Recommendation accepted. Thank you very much. So we move on then to item 12, I think it is. 11, work programme. Jen, do you have any thoughts on that? I think we've got a
I suppose
table
just
showing
to
that.
highlight that you have the future dates and reports coming to the committee. Our next meeting in June, we will be discussing future dates and hopefully the draft work programme for the remainder of 24 and 25.
Okay. I'll mention a conversation I've had about constitutional review. If you look at the terms of reference we have, biannual review carried out into the Constitution by this committee. The proposal at the moment is that there will be a review which will be carried out in September, October and November 2025, which is next year. So there'll be a paper perhaps coming from the executive maybe to the June meeting, which will explain the scope of that and how it's to be done. We want to do it over a relatively short period of time with a view then for implementing any changes for the following municipal year. So hopefully we'll get something before council before May 2026. So that's just to give you an indication of future work. It'd be interesting to have a look at any thoughts anybody has about constitutional changes. It's important, I think, that we implement any during the course of this 4-year period when we're members. We don't want to introduce something which is introduced right at the very end. We'd like to have a year in which is embedded in. 2 years would be even better, but at least let's have 1 year of any changes being embedded. We have the governance statement every year. Does that come in June this year, Rachel? Is that?
Yeah, so it's part of the statutory account, so it will come following the 1st of May deadline.
So that corporate statement reviews the previous municipal year and makes recommendations as to how things might be improved over during the following year. It tends to be only looked at once a year, and I think it would be helpful for us to have an interim report halfway through the year as to what progress is being made against the objectives. This doesn't come as a surprise. I've mentioned it to officers. So I guess in something like if the report comes out in June, then certainly before maybe November, something like that, we'll have a look to see what progress has been made against the objectives set out in that statement. Training. I've written a note here about training, so we might have some training on audit and this system through you, Rupert. Pensions is another interesting subject, I think, for members of the committee. Andrew, I'm not sure what thoughts you have on how we might get some training on that in a meaningful manner.
Thank you, Chair. It is an important, and it's quite a large number in our annual accounts, as we've just heard when we were talking about the audit plan. The scheme actuaries for the Worcestershire and Herefordshire Fund, they've just been through a process and they've changed to new actuaries. They are offering to run a training course for members to talk about the financial impacts and what you need to look out for in terms of your role as an audit and committee. And they're not expecting you to become actuaries or experts in the pension fund, but they're clearly things that you need to be aware of and things that you may want to ask questions about. So they have offered to run a training session. So I'm minded to take them up on that if you're so minded.
you think, would that be online, do you think, Andrew, or would they come to?
I would hope they will come here, but it may be online. I need to have a further conversation with them.
And presumably we'd rather tag it onto an existing meeting rather than having an extra meeting. So, you know, we put an hour at the end of a meeting like this to go through it, or would you prefer a separate day? Just no particular, I think Mark's saying. Yeah. Perhaps you bear that in mind, Andrew.
It's normally about an hour and a half. They could talk forever if you want to do it, so a specialist subject, but if we aim for about an hour and a half, and then that would allow you questions and further work.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably better to have it as a separate event rather
You think?
than
Yeah.
it onto a meeting. Otherwise, you'll find people will be creeping out.
Okay.
If I've made the journey here in person, I value in-person training. So yeah, one visit suits me for both meeting and training.
Yeah.
And especially with we get nice
Biscuits. Yes.
I'm eating either way, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Well, we could start. I suppose we could start at 1 o'clock. Have something like that. And the other issue is about risk. Again, Andrew and I had a conversation about this. The insurers, in terms of traditional kind of insurance, were offering to do some training, but that sounded a little bit less palatable to the committee from what you told me.
They very happy to run a 3-day training course, which I'm sure will be very illuminating, but probably we need to have a shorter version for yourselves. So we were asking that question, could they run, again, an hour and a half type course for you?
Thank you, Andrew. All right, so if you take those on board, Jenny, let's not make sure they don't drop off the list. We're almost a year of having this committee, and we haven't really had that much trainings. I think we called for it right at the beginning, so let's work on that. Okay, so that was the forward plan. Date of the next meeting is the 11th of June. And the next item is about the exclusion of the press. Let me get my script. Okay, so in the opinion of the proper officer, the next item will not be, or is likely not to be, open to the public and press at the time it is considered. So the recommendation is that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public is excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as outlined in Schedule 12A of the Act, as indicated below. Paragraph 3, information related to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. It's a little bit difficult because it's sort of smoke and mirrors as to whether this is appropriate, but I'm asked to ask our committee members contend that this item be discussed in private session, and could we have a show of hands? All approved, thank you. So